The year is 1932. The world is in a bit of a pickle. The Great Depression has its chilly grip on economies far and wide. In the vast, sun-scorched wheat belt of Western Australia, another crisis was brewing. This one, however, was not economic. It was ornithological. A great migration was underway, not of people seeking work, but of birds. 20,000 of them, to be precise. These were not your common or garden sparrows. Oh no, these were emus. Great big flightless birds with legs like tree trunks and an insatiable appetite for wheat. They descended upon the farmlands of Campion and Walgulan, a feathered plague of quite astonishing proportions, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. The farmers, many of them ex-soldiers from the Great War, were at their wits' end. They had battled the Kaiser's armies, and now they faced a foe of a different sort, a foe that was, frankly, eating their livelihood. They're running through the fences like they're not even there, one farmer might have lamented to a newsreel camera. Tearing up the crops they are, it's a proper disaster. The government in Perth listened. They heard the desperate pleas. A solution was needed, and in a moment of what can only be described as magnificently misplaced confidence, they decided to deploy the military. Yes, you heard that correctly. The Royal Australian Artillery was about to go to war with a bird. The stage was set for one of history's most peculiar conflicts. The belligerents were clear. On one side, Homo sapiens, armed with the pinnacle of modern warfare technology. On the other, Dromaeus novaehollandii, armed with, well, beaks and an uncanny ability to run very, very fast. Major G.P.W. Meredith of the 7th Heavy Battery was given command. He was a serious man, tasked with a profoundly unserious mission. The press dubbed it the Great Emu War. Little did anyone know that the emus had not read the script. They were not going to be the easy targets everyone expected. The curtain was about to rise on a truly bizarre chapter of Australian history. So, picture the scene. The golden wheat fields stretching to the horizon under a brilliant blue sky. The air is thick with the scent of eucalyptus and the nervous anticipation of battle. The soldiers are ready, their Lewis machine guns polished and prepared. The enemy is in sight, a vast shifting mass of feathers and fury. The world watches on, entirely unaware that it is about to witness a masterclass in guerrilla warfare. Not from trained soldiers, but from a flock of very large, very clever and very, very hungry birds. The war was on, and the outcome was anything but certain. What a curious business. The military operation began on the 2nd of November 1932. Major Meredith and his men arrived in the district of Campion feeling rather confident. They brought with them 2 state-of-the-art Lewis automatic machine guns and 10,000 rounds of ammunition. Surely this would be enough to deal with a few bothersome birds. The plan was simple. Herd the emus into a confined area and then let rip with the machine guns. It was a strategy that had worked on other battlefields against other enemies. The emus, however, were an entirely different kind of adversary. They were not an army that marched in neat, predictable lines. They were a chaotic, unpredictable force of nature. The first engagement was, to put it mildly, a bit of a letdown. A group of about 50 emus was spotted. The soldiers, with all the stealth they could muster, set up their gun. The local settlers tried to herd the birds towards the waiting machine gunners. This was the moment. The gunner took aim. "Fire!" Meredith must have commanded, picturing a swift and decisive victory. The Lewis gun chattered to life, spitting bullets across the field. But the emus, upon hearing the racket, did something utterly brilliant. They scattered, not in one panicked mob, but into countless small groups, running in every direction at once, making them impossible targets. A great deal of ammunition was spent for very few casualties. The frustration for Major Meredith and his men began to mount almost immediately. A second attempt proved even more farcical. The soldiers spotted a flock of nearly 1,000 emus. This time, they would not be outsmarted. They mounted one of the Lewis guns onto a truck, creating a makeshift mobile assault vehicle. The idea was to chase the birds down. "Drive! Get us closer!" One can imagine the gunner yelling over the roar of the engine. The truck bounced violently over the rough terrain, making it nearly impossible to aim. The emus, meanwhile, ran at speeds of up to 50 kilometers per hour, easily outpacing the clumsy vehicle. The chase was a comedy of errors. The truck lurched, the gunner swore, and the emus weaved and dodged with infuriating agility. At one point, the truck reportedly crashed through a farmer's fence, adding property damage to the growing list of failures. Not a single bird was hit during this chaotic pursuit. The soldiers were not just being defeated, they were being made to look foolish. The 10,000 rounds of ammunition were beginning to look rather insufficient. The mighty Australian army was being outmaneuvered, outrun, and outsmarted by a bird that cannot even fly. The war was not going according to plan, not at all. One might be tempted to think the emus were simply lucky, but to witness their behavior was to see something that looked uncannily like strategy. The birds were not just running scared, they were operating with a strange collective intelligence. Ornithologists observing the conflict noted that each small flock of emus seemed to have a leader, a tall, black-plumed bird that would stand watch while its comrades pillaged the wheat fields. This lookout would keep an eye on the soldiers, and, at the first sign of danger, it would give a warning call. Then, and only then, would the flock disperse, leaving the gunners with nothing to shoot at but dust. Major Meredith himself expressed a grudging admiration for his feathered foes. He compared them to Zulu warriors in their ability to face machine guns with near impunity. If we had a military division with the bullet-carrying capacity of these birds, he was quoted as saying, it would face any army in the world. The emus seemed to have an almost supernatural sense of when they were out of range. The soldiers would line up a perfect shot, only for the birds to calmly move just beyond the Lewis gun's effective reach. It was as if they understood the very mechanics of the weapons being used against them. The emu's tactics were simple but devastatingly effective: divide and conquer. When confronted, they would never stay in one large, easy-to-target group. Instead, they would split into smaller units and run in multiple directions, forcing the soldiers to choose which handful of birds to pursue, while the rest escaped unharmed. This tactic made the machine guns, designed for use against massed infantry, almost completely useless. Firing a burst of bullets at a single fast-moving target was a spectacular waste of ammunition. The soldiers found themselves in a tactical nightmare of their own making, one orchestrated by a seemingly disorganized mob of giant birds. The sheer resilience of the emus was also a factor. Reports from the field claimed that the birds were incredibly tough. They could take multiple bullet wounds and just keep on running, disappearing over the horizon as if merely annoyed by the interruption. The soldiers were fighting an enemy that refused to play by the rules of conventional warfare. An enemy that was fast, clever, and almost comically durable. The great Australian army, veterans of Gallipoli and the Western Front, were well and truly stuck. Their foe was not just a pest, it was a highly effective non-human guerrilla army. After nearly a week of this feathered folly, the results were laughably poor. Official figures vary, but it's estimated that after firing thousands of rounds of ammunition, the soldiers had managed to kill fewer than 100 emus. Some reports put the number as low as 50. The cost in bullets per bird was astronomical. The press, which had initially treated the story as a curious novelty, began to have a field day. Headlines mocked the military's efforts. Politicians in Canberra began asking awkward questions about the use of army resources to fight a losing battle against a flock of birds. The whole affair was becoming a national embarrassment. Major Meredith and his men were exhausted and demoralized. Their formidable Lewis guns had been rendered impotent by the emus' maddening tactics. Their ammunition was dwindling, and their pride was in tatters. The sight of soldiers returning from the front, complaining about the cunning of their avian enemy, was too much for the public to bear. On the 8th of November, less than a week after it began, the first phase of the Great Emu War came to an ignominious end. The troops were recalled. The emus, it seemed, had won the first round. The farmers were, of course, no better off. There was a second attempt a few days later, prompted by renewed pressure from the farming community. Major Meredith, ever the dutiful soldier, returned to the field. This time they had slightly more success, managing to kill a few hundred emus over the course of a month. But the larger problem remained. The vast majority of the 20,000-strong emu army was still at large, happily munching on wheat. By early December, it was clear the military campaign was a failure. The Minister for Defence officially withdrew the troops, concluding that the operation was not cost-effective. The war was over. The emus had won. In the end, the Great Emu War serves as a wonderfully absurd footnote in military history. It's a reminder that technological superiority is no guarantee of victory, especially when your enemy is a fast-running, thick-skinned and surprisingly clever bird. The emus of Western Australia had faced down the army and emerged triumphant, securing their place in the annals of strange and wonderful conflicts. The soldiers retreated, the guns fell silent, and the emus continued to roam the plains, the undisputed feathered champions of the battlefield. A truly remarkable and quintessentially Australian tale.